Welcome to Human Powered, the podcast about creating a high-performing agency or consultancy business. I'm Trenton Moss, and today I have Toby Southgate, Global CEO of We Are Social. Toby, hello.
Hello, Trenton.
Hi, Toby. Thank you so much for joining. So, We Are Social is a socially led creative agency, and you've been global CEO for just over a year now, leading 1,200 people across 16 offices in 4 continents. So, Toby, agencies are very much human-first businesses, and I know that you're really passionate about human-first leadership. Tell me a bit more about what that means in practice.
Thanks, Trenton. Yeah, you said it. These are human-first businesses. We spend, every creative agency on the planet spends most of its outgoings on our people. And for me, that means a constant reference and a constant reminder that those people's lives, their well-being, the attitude and the energy they bring to work, the ways in which they engage with each other when they're at work and the way they're inspired out of work, these things come together and blend into one thing that sometimes we might refer to as company culture, but that really, I think, respects and needs attention because it's quite fragile, because we are all human beings. We have emotions and we have egos. We have our own personal context and the layers of identity that we bring to our work and that represent our lives. And my overwhelming commitment and my complete unfailing belief is that the job of leaders in human capital businesses remind ourselves constantly that we are a place where human beings need to thrive in order to contribute, and they need to develop and to grow in order to feel like it's a great place for them to continue in their careers and in their professional lives with us. So I think it's recognizing the fragility, but also embracing the opportunity that represents and the really rare and special environments that can be created if you're paying the right kind of attention to the right kinds of things.
What a great way to kick off this conversation. I love what you're saying. I 100% buy into all of that. And how do you make that a reality when you have so many pressures every single day around profitability and efficiency and clients and so on?
There are layers of responsibility that I try and think about, and certainly that I talk about internally and have done in most of the leadership roles that I've had. And obviously there's a box of responsibilities and accountabilities that sit with anyone who is running a commercial enterprise. And in my experience, I've seen people who are able to wear those responsibilities at a leadership level relatively lightly. They understand them. It's a part of the way that they manage their working day and working life. And what they don't do is pass that pressure around them outside of that box through the business and make people at every level, in every office and every function, at every layer of experience and seniority feel and wear that pressure themselves, because frankly, that's not the job of every single person in the business, and particularly in a human capital business and a creatively oriented organization. I think that there's actually a job of leadership to absorb as much of those pressures as possible and to retain them and manage through them in a way that protects the body of the enterprise, the majority of our human capital, and enables those people to do the things that they love doing and are great at, the things that they're passionate about. And for most people in a business like ours, it's making work, it's coming up with ideas, it's debating and engaging with clients on new things. And that, for me, is a critical task. You can't have a healthy human capital, creatively oriented business if that commercial pressure is just pushed down everywhere across the organization and everybody in the business feels it. That absorption layer, the insulation layer of leadership, is something I certainly believe in and I look out for in leaders around me. That's the best way, I think, to protect the energy and the emotions of the human capital that we need to make sure we're making the best possible work for our clients. If everyone was worried about the numbers, we'd only be worried about the numbers. And the quality of the work is probably directly proportionate to the amount of insulation that our leaders can provide. I do not want everybody stressing about money, P&L, and finances. The right people find those challenges and accountabilities somewhat empowering, certainly a part of their own leadership capabilities and their expectations that they have of their roles. And they also understand the value of that protective and insulative layer. I've worked across a handful of different organizations in our space, and one of them, the things that made me uncomfortable as emerging leader were almost a military-like hierarchy, where looking right to the top, you could see a very specific leadership style that was diligent, absolutely commercially focused. But I saw around that person a leadership style emerging where that kind of approach was felt to be the only possible approach that could lead to success. And as a result, given those layers of hierarchy, I could observe that same behavior and that same kind of diligence being pushed down through the business at almost every management layer. And that for me was problematic. I could see it stifling innovation and creativity. I could see and definitely observe people who had not been as effectively trained or had the same kind of commercial or financial background, able to apply that thinking to they would see pressure on a number to deliver at the end of the month or at the end of the quarter. But I've got half a dozen writers, art directors, and makers around me, and they need to make sure they've got the right equipment to deliver on set next week. Like, how do I square those two things? That pressure felt day to day on a piece of client business that would inevitably be impacted by those worries and concerns was a direct result of a leadership style that worked at a very senior level, being felt to be the way of doing things within that organization, trying to apply the same lessons at every level in order to serve what you consider as an individual to be progress. That to me felt destructive and restricting rather than constructive and empowering. With the benefit of hindsight, it's certainly something that I've taken forward into subsequent roles and tried quite hard to understand what's the genesis of this behavior. And in that organization at that time, it was very clear where it came from.
I really like that phrase you used there, the destructive and restrictive versus constructive and empowering. And it's almost like the constructive and empowering is the underpinning of perhaps your leadership style. And Toby, I'd like to take you back in time to just over a year ago when you joined the business. And at that time, your remit was to take over from the founders. That's a big job. What needed to change, but also what needed to stay the same?
There were two founders originally, and they created something properly special, very rare. It had become from literally a startup round a table in London 17, 18 years ago to 1,200 people across the globe, everywhere from LA to Sydney. The growth trajectory was incredibly impressive and something quite rare. And so what needed to stay the same was quite obvious, I think, to me from the outside. That was that very clearly that this business is doing something right. It's in a great space. And increasingly, you can look back now 17, 18 years ago and say these guys were very definitely ahead of their time in building a business around the point of view that socially led creative is a route to playing a more central role as the marketing ecosystem changes. So they were doing an awful lot right, a lot of which I think comes back to a spirit of founder-led entrepreneurship. So lots that needed to stay the same and certainly should and will continue to stay the same. The opportunities for evolution were honestly about growing up a little, I think, maturing into an understanding of what it means to be a global agency network of 1,200 people in 16 offices, and the opportunities that in itself affords our people, our clients, internal culture, mobility, whatever it may be, that operating as a properly connected and collaborative organism is an opportunity for everybody's lives within the business to change and evolve a little bit for the better, to operationalize a structure that had been built entrepreneurially, bottom up, and to try and put in place some of the systems, the thinking, the principles that would enable us to move our business into the next era of its own growth. So the notion of an organizational model and operational structure that enabled leaders and our parents plus company to get a deeper understanding faster of where opportunities for growth really lie and where issues that require some ironing out, some massaging, some management where they sit as well, became an easier task. So getting ourselves organized and really understanding what it is that we want to be for the next 17 or 18 years has been a sort of core focus of the role. And I think it will continue in that vein, because we are, in our world, with this emphasis on socially led creative work, helping brands navigate a landscape that's changing faster than ever. It would be somewhat crazy for me to predict that there's a single way to get this right. So in 24 months, we need to do this. It is more about constant evolution than a radical change, planting a flag and racing towards it. But all of that speaks to the strengths of the business that the founders set out to build and indeed ended up building. So we had a lot to work with that was great. And with a handful of relatively significant, but hopefully to most people, largely invisible changes, then I do feel that we're able to move into that future with a bit more confidence and certainly with a lot more clarity around how we work and how we expect our people to contribute to the journey that we're on.
Great. What an amazing journey you've been on the last year and a half. And you talk about the changes that you need to bring in, which perhaps didn't affect everyone in the business. What about the people that it did affect? How do you make sure that all of those people, they understand what's happening, they understand that you think this business is brilliant, you don't want to throw away all the great stuff? How do you make sure of that they buy into you and the vision that you have?
I wish there was an easy and single answer to getting that right or making certain that it happens. I think the reality is the best thing that we can do as leaders is communicate what we're doing and why we're doing it, and then over communicate what we're doing and why we're doing it, and then communicate again and understand and help people around us see that if we need to make an adjustment here or there, that we will. If things are going well, we can do more of them. If we're learning and things are going less well, how are we going to evolve our approach to make sure we cannot go down a dead end for too long? But it was particularly obvious in this organization because, of course, a new CEO from the outside for the first time in 17, 18 years is in itself a very significant indicator both of change and the need for change. So defining the need and helping people understand the context and why this process was underway, that was something that I found very helpful. It meant that every time I spoke to people within the business, whether that was at the leadership level as I settled into the executive team, or with the leaders of offices, or indeed with the whole agency, we do an all-agency town hall every quarter. I've done 5 of them now, where I just chat to everybody for 45 minutes or so, give them an update on our progress, what leadership is thinking, what's on our agenda for the coming quarter, our achievements of the last quarter, how we're tracking against plans. So amplifying that level of communication, and I don't mean to say top down in a hierarchical sense, I actually mean almost the opposite, that the job I feel I have is to make sure that all of our people, all of our leaders, all of our management really feel and understand enough about where the agency as a whole is going and the evolution that we're going through to be able to represent it as all of ours. It's leadership from behind and from the bottom, if you like, arming people with ammunition, giving them clear view on where we're going and why and what's evolving around the edges and what we're exploring, and also being open. This agency has actually done a phenomenal job over a long period of time now of listening to its people. We have a very regular dialogue. Twice a year, we go out to the whole agency as well, and on top of the sort of regular cadence of management dialogue, asking the business how our people across the board feel that we're doing. Our response rate is fantastic. We learn something every time we field the survey. We change something or introduce something new every time we hear the voice of the business. And that, I think, helps people feel both much better connected. They feel like they've moved perhaps from working in an office of 40 or 60 people that has lots of other offices under its same flag around the world to feeling, oh, that's really interesting. There are things happening in Singapore that could be of benefit to our team in Sydney, and things happening in London that could be of benefit to Toronto, and things happening in LA that offer support to a team working on a pitch for a new client in Paris. And sharing and connecting those stories comes, I think, from a point of view of internal communication and collaboration being both amplified and encouraged, rather than something people think about after the fact or later or feel it's not really their place, or that they're not able to ask those questions internally. I think that's a big shift, and it will certainly continue. There's never one list of things you can do and then tell everyone that this is how it's going to be. You have to encourage the behaviors. And again, that goes back to the sort of the environment that we're trying to create as leaders.
Toby, it sounds like one of your big objectives at the start was to shift the business from being a group of independently operating offices through to being one connected business. And you've talked through a few things that you've done to help that. I want to hear more about this. What else did you do to create that feeling of you being one business across all these different locations?
I think a handful of things, right? What were the things that I can now see made the biggest difference? And one of them was underway before I started. It was essentially just an evolution of the organizational model where we took 16 individual offices and organized them into 3 regions. Rebecca running North America, Susie running APAC, and then Jim Coleman, who had been the CEO of the UK business, took over the leadership of the EMEA region. So Susie, Rebecca, and Jim as 3 regional CEOs, alongside our global functional leaders in commercial and finance operations, strategy and growth, people and culture, and a chief of staff who keeps us all together. Like that small team, that small central team of a handful of people, it is accountable for the delivery of the whole agency. Now, that team works very closely with teams around them in their regions and offices. That's another layer of leadership that was already in place and that was incredibly important. And each of those leaders has obviously built their own relationships and dialogue and cadence. We didn't mandate a very specific individual roadmap for how each region should run, or even suggest that they should run in the same ways. But the space and the room that Rebecca, Susie, and Jim have in those roles is quite significant. And the space that our leadership teams in offices have, which was one of the strengths that we had to build on, given the way that the business had been built, is a strength that we wanted to retain. This seems to have given us a really great balance between encouraging and empowering leaders at every level and organizing our business more effectively at a global level. So that I would say is the most obvious indicative change. And I must credit others with the decision. I think coming in almost all the way through my interview process, it was clear that a change like this was coming. And so the business itself, our parent company, our investors, could all coalesce around how we move the business forward. And I think that is about moving in some ways away from, but without losing any of the cultural potency of leadership-driven entrepreneurial spirit, always looking forwards, innovating, changing, but moving from what was described, I think, at one point to me as a loosely federated model into something that is more consistently and more operationally consistent and clear. A structure that enables us to make the best of our structure and our footprint for our people, for the work that they make, and for our clients. And the other piece of going back to it, but it's just something that I don't think you can over the importance of, is communication through that process. Any change process, any transformation project, it doesn't matter how neat the slides are or how tidy the spreadsheets look. The actions only happen as a result of human-to-human communication, and not just once. The actions only happen and the change is only realized if people are talking consistently and clearly about the changes we're going through, why we're going through them, what shifts as a result, supporting each other through the journey. No one having the answers, because there have obviously been curveballs at almost every stage, things that have happened in the last 3 or 4 months that we wouldn't have predicted 16 or 18 months ago. And that will always be the case. But what the new structure has enabled us to do is give ourselves a layer of protection and insulation and make sure that the connective tissue between our office leadership, our regional leadership, global leadership, and all of our teams everywhere around the agency is closer and tighter than ever, I hope. It's not ever finished. That's one of the motivating forces of working in an industry like this. There's no such thing as perfect. And if it feels great for a moment, that probably means that you need to keep pushing and evolving another step. But I think that progress is unequivocally clear. And certainly we've seen the performance of the business adjust as a result. So yeah, those two things, the structure in which we go about our business and the clarity of communication around change.
You've talked quite a bit about that communication and the need to over communicate and to keep the conversation going. And something else that you've mentioned quite a few times is about the entrepreneurial spirit in the business. And that's something that was there from the founders and something that you've been keen to maintain. How do you do that? How do you keep an entrepreneurial spirit in a business of 1,200 people without it just becoming chaos?
1,200 people, it doesn't require all 1,200 people to be fiercely independent, single-minded. There are traits of entrepreneurs that you can harness within any kind of broader environment. The notion of collaboration being one of them, looking around the business for support and guidance and help, borrowing successes, moving quickly on from anything resembling a failure. It's as much behavioral as it is a description of a job. And I think that's something that we work quite hard to communicate across the business and to measure people against, and to, frankly, also to develop our working culture and our behavioral expectations in ways that support a direction that actually the agency laid out some time ago in terms of its anticipated behaviors. And they manifest in something we call the code. It's in slightly constant evolution, particularly the definition around the three core behaviors, but they're pretty straightforward, and they all speak to some kind of founder mentality or a wish and an appetite to move things forward. And they're about going beyond the expected. That's a spirit of over delivery. It's a spirit of great being not quite great enough. It's an appetite to keep pushing. There's one about working better together, which we feel super strongly about, because in a loose-knit federation, you need to encourage people and give them reason to rally under the same flag. In a much better organized and connected collaborative environment, we need to hold and put up on a pedestal the expectation that giving something away, your time, an introduction to a client, if it's of benefit to others in the collective, is a really powerful, quite sort of radical act. We have to move away from any notion of protectionism to represent we are social as a global organization first. And then the third code is about focus. That's about adaptability and decisiveness and clarity on the goal, like moving the business forward, making the best of the situation that we are in, and getting to a position everywhere of real sort of sustainable growth and ambition. And in any business of 16 offices or 1,200 people, but in any networked entity, it needs to be both understood and supported that there will be weeks and months and years where 1 or 3 or 5 or 12 or 14 of the offices are having a great time. And conversely, that 1 or 12 or 8 or 14 offices are having a less great time. But the whole and the value of the whole and the brand that gives us to build and extend relationships, to stay connected, to support each other through those ebbs and flows, like that in itself is of immense value. And it also enables us to speak really clearly to all of our people about what this connected whole can do for people in their careers and can offer them by way of development opportunity, exposure, a broader palette of work, a broader palette of people to learn from. These are the less visible values and strengths of a global creative agency. And if we can make a virtue of those less visible strengths, I've got no question it has an impact on our performance.
Toby, you've got those three core behaviors. How do you make sure that everyone knows them, everyone understands them, everyone buys into them, and everyone is living and breathing them?
You can stick it on a sign on a wall in an office somewhere. I actually think it's quite a visible way of setting an expectation. But on a longer term basis, where it impacts people is every step of the employee journey. We've got a really well-connected global people and culture function. Our code appears in all of our role descriptions. It would absolutely be a part of an onboarding exercise for a new joiner. Once you're in the business, it's a part of the way that you're managed and measured as you make progress through the agency. And it's something that we talk about internally in every one major town halls or our internal meetings. And critically, what we absolutely encourage, given that evolutionary state, is that, for example, Susie ran her strategy day for the Australia business And she talked about the three core behaviors, two of them in broadly aligned ways with identical language, one of them in a slightly different way with her own language and her own expectations set around the same themes, no question, but in ways that wouldn't contradict anything else happening anywhere else in the agency, but that absolutely encouraged and enabled her and her team to have their own fingerprints on their own requirements and expectations for their people in that market for this year. And maybe for next year, it evolves again. But that also space to play inside a framework is quite a powerful element of getting people broadly singing the same songs to the same tunes and not mandating that it's a perfectly orchestrated choir where every voice is in perfect harmony all the time. Sometimes a little bit of rub and a bit of a push in an environment of healthy debate, it enables everybody to get a little bit better. So no diktats and no mandates, but really strong frameworks for guidance.
I really like that phrase, space to play inside the framework. Toby, you talked quite a bit at the start about protecting the team from all of those commercial pressures. And I wanted to go back to that a little bit. I want to talk a bit about how do you get the balance, right? Because you want everyone in the business to obviously be delivering great work to clients, but you also want one eye on the commercial realities of running an agency. So how do you protect people from the commercial pressures while still encouraging them to support the commercial success of the business?
I think it's important. You ended that question by saying to support the commercial success of the business. And I think the most important thing is to be comfortable acknowledging that's what we are. And it doesn't always happen, quite honestly. If you protect the people in a creatively oriented environment too much, it can become challenging. It can become too disconnected from the day-to-day working lives of too many people, too disconnected from the reality that we are a commercial business, a for-profit entity with shareholders and investors. And like anyone with shareholders and investors, they have expectations. And none of their expectations are unreasonable, given what we have gained from their investment and their support. So I'm quite comfortable, and my encouragement to anybody leading a creative business would be to be comfortable sharing numbers, talking about that reality, and also using that context to set up a position where more people can see it as a leadership task to take those decisions, to manage that pressure, to absorb and protect people from the pressured elements of those discussions, the sort of negatively pressured elements of those discussions, the tough decisions that sometimes need to be taken in order to focus on, as I said earlier, the things that those people enjoy doing, love doing, and are great at. And it would obviously be a significant problem if more people in a business like ours felt they were great at and loved running our P&Ls and doing budget forecasting and thinking about M&A activity and how to fund hiring and the costs of our IT and software overheads. We want few people worrying about those things and lots of people obsessed about the work that we make, about the ideas that come through the business and that we serve up to our clients and that we get out in the world and what we learn from that exercise. But equally, making sure that everybody is aware to the extent that there are always decisions that need to be taken in order to support the needs of We Are Social as a commercial for-profit entity. We are not a charity. We are not an art foundation. And that has to be a comfortable conversation. I haven't worked with too many people that can comfortably express that reality while also encouraging and empowering the focus on the work. It's not always felt to be a good thing, but I have never seen it not be a useful layer of context for anyone doing a job in a creative agency, whatever that job is, because it just helps people understand that there's a lot going on, and sometimes it's helpful just to know that there's a lot going on and a lot of pressure being absorbed to create the space for people to do, as I say, the things they're great at and love doing. There are some people that are great at and love doing all the operational stuff, all the commercial stuff, all the reporting, but obviously they need to be and are pointed at tasks and engaged at an appropriate level and in the way of a lot of these potentially difficult and challenging discussions. It's an ongoing task. But I think without the clarity and the reality, a lot of people can spend a lot of time, particularly as they join businesses like ours, really without the understanding of how money is made, why growth is important, what it enables us to do. And I want us to get more and more comfortable with those discussions. We already are much more comfortable with them than we were 18 months or so ago. But I think it's a healthy environment to try and create. And transparency is really important. People feel good if they can see and hear an open view on where the business is going and how it's performing. It doesn't need to be minutely specific. It doesn't need to be the line by line analysis of every item on the P&L. But broadly speaking, what do our shareholders expect? Why do they expect that? What did we tell them? What did we forecast? And how are we performing against that forecast? That's a pretty easy story to tell. And as I say, on the whole, my experience has been that people that didn't understand or had never been shared that kind of information, they appreciate it and they find it useful in broadening their understanding of the context that we're working in.
Yeah, it sounds like that's a key change that you've brought into the business. Okay, Toby, one thing we haven't talked about that I know is that you have this idea of a global constituency within the business. And I think it would be remiss of me if we were to end this conversation without talking about it. So, yeah, tell me about the global constituency. What is it?
There's a 1,200 people business here called We Are Social, 16 offices. And the wish that I have and the journey that we're on is that everybody within the organization can really value their role in multiple constituencies. And if you think about it in layers around an individual, I could be a producer in We Are Social in Munich. And my immediate constituency is the studio team or the production team in We Are Social Munich, which is a component of the creative team or the studio team in We Are Social Munich, which is a constituent of We Are Social's Munich office, which is a constituency of the We Are Social Germany business, which in turn is a part of We Are Social in EMEA, which in turn is part of We Are Social globally, which in turn is part of Blusco. And sometimes that distance can feel great. The wish I have is that people understand and we help them understand the value of sitting in multiple constituencies within We Are Social. And the most important one being We Are Social globally first. Constituencies can ripple around that, but I really want people to feel like being a part of that global entity is a core component of the reason that they want to be with us and make progress with us, why clients want to work with us. And that no matter how many other constituencies you sit in, because you can sit in many different ones, a client team, a team in a single office on a single client is a constituency of its own, represented by other functions. But these constituencies taken all together give us our identity at work, and they give us our identity within the business. There can feel like quite a distance between that producer in Munich and Chris Adamson, our global chief operating officer. Right? Those people could sit next to each other around a table or on a train to a meeting. I want them to feel like they are peers, that they are components and constituents of We Are Social. Whatever their functional identity, whatever their hierarchical identity, whatever their level of experience in the business, and that there will be times when those constituencies come together. And when they come together and they give people exposure and an opportunity to hear a different view or learn from somebody else's experience, then those are the things that for me can make a pretty big and pretty global business feel very small and very personal. And if it feels small and personal, it also feels, I think, a little bit more engaging and potentially rewarding as an environment for people to build their careers in. That can lead to conversations about mobility and progression and staying connected across these constituencies where, again, let's pick on that producer in Munich. If that producer's lifetime ambition is one day to relocate to another part of the world, that they would feel legitimate as a candidate for any other roles that we might have in any other offices in the world. And they'd stay with us and they build their career with us because they've been given that awareness of the constituencies within which they sit, and that their leaders and the teams around them can represent to them, and that they themselves can represent to their colleagues and their peers. So I think it's just a way of making something that's quite big and distributed feel closer and more personal.
What a lovely ethos to bring into what is quite a large business. And Toby, you're just over a year, almost 18 months into the role. Yeah, what's next for you? And indeed, what's next for the business?
Continue the journey. I came in thinking that at the very least, this was probably a 3 to 5 year task. I can honestly say I've found it much harder and more rewarding than I thought it would be. We've made a lot of progress, and I have an increasing sharpness to my ambition for what I think We Are Social can become. Given we talked earlier about the visionary nature of the business and the founders when they put it together, they took a view on the long-term influence that social channels and platforms would have in the wider context of the evolving marketing ecosystem. So it's only a year and a bit, nearly 18 months. So more of the same, more progress, and an increasingly well-connected singular We Are Social that is moving towards a position of sustainable long-term growth for our people, for the work that our people make, and as a result, for the business we do with our clients.
What a great way to finish this conversation. Toby, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to join today. It's been so lovely hearing all the wonderful things that you've been doing at We Are Social.
Thanks, Trenton. Really enjoyed the chat.
You've been listening to Human Powered, the podcast all about creating a high-performing agency or consultancy business. Thanks for tuning in.